Okay, cool. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming. Let's begin. I'm trying to share my screen. I'm assuming that... Can you guys see a screen? So we'll share a window instead. Okay, cool. I seem to have a little bit of difficulty sharing a full screen. So here we are on the window. That should be okay. Welcome, everyone, to my talk about the infamous Node.js stack with Sequelize and Typescript. And I think to start, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Sean Hurwitz. I was born in South Africa. Like it says, I'm still in South Africa. I used to not code. I only started coding around 2019. And since then, I've just absolutely loved the ride. Absolutely love coding and highly encourage everyone to just keep on learning. Now I code, but I still like to do non-code stuff like run, and hopefully run some code as well. I am the one on the left-hand side, if anyone was wondering, and that's my kids using me as a boat. So I'll give you just a bit of an introduction about what I do as like my day job. And we're actually, it's really, really cool. It's pretty much got all the fun stuff. We're a logistics software solution, pretty much taking the entire holistic software chain and supply chain and everything like that, and putting it into like deliverable products. So you have real-time data, you have WebSockets, you have live updates, where your trucks are, where your fleet is, all cool things like that. You can plot your routes. We got some D3 on over here if you've ever used it before. Sorry. And yeah, that's pretty much what we do. We have a pretty cool tech stack. We've got NoSQL databases, relational databases. We've got Kafka topics and streams. We've got a full architecture on AWS. Really exciting stuff. But what I'm focusing on today is relational databases. We use MySQL on cloud, and we use Node.js as our backend server. We use Sequelize as an ORM, and I'll just introduce these technologies briefly. Like I said, this talk is mainly for people who have some experience in TypeScript and JavaScript. And, if for absolute beginners of JavaScript, I'm sure you can still glean some very invaluable stuff. And hopefully see why TypeScript is pretty much part and parcel of JavaScript and shouldn't be seen as an add-on later. So let's just jump into it. So the outline of this talk, first we're going to go into some hopes and dreams, if anyone knows the reference. But essentially, we're going to see what goals we want to get out of this talk. Then I'm going to just introduce some concepts and definitions for you about what I'm going to discuss, what we're going to explore. And then we're going to have a live coding session. And then finally, we're going to have a Q&A, and hopefully we'll make some profit out of that too. So that's just going to be the breakdown of this talk. And yeah, let's go into it. So what do I want out of this talk? What would I like to give you out of this talk? My goal is to help you all code a little better than you did before we had this session. And I think that's noble enough. Oh, sorry, I've got a bit of feedback from someone. I don't know if someone's muted, unmuted or something like that. Don't seem to be able to mute all. Okay, it seems to be gone. Okay, that's cool. So once again, I'm absolutely honored to, give this talk, and I still feel the best way of learning is by actually teaching. And, I encourage everyone to be able to give over what you have, and even if you don't think it's a lot, like I really don't think I'm going to give over massive, new innovative stuff. But I know that it's something that's helped us. I know it feels like clean code. Can everyone hear me? It's someone saying that the speaker's mic is muted. Just give me someone just, if anyone can just reply and say that you guys can hear me. Okay, cool. All right, so 00 gigs. Thank you, everyone. Awesome. So I think maybe something's just wrong with your mic or your speakers. Interesting. Cool. So I think with that goal in mind, even if you take just one small thing from this, just write a function cleaner, just to understand, not to repeat code, not to copy and paste, to have common modules, anything like that, it will be a massive thing. And we can all just code a little better, and just bring our repositories up to a higher level of standard. Cool. So let's jump into it before we do our live coding session. What are we going to achieve? We're going to create a repository using Node.js and using Sequelize to connect to a relational database. It's going to be a backend. I'm not going to connect it to a server specifically, like using Express or GraphQL. I don't think we'll have time for that. But if anyone's interested in that afterwards, you can always ask me how one would do that. We're going to create the core modules for the backend, and we're going to run like a very simple test suite, hopefully, if we have enough time. So the first thing we're going to do is use Sequelize, which is an ORM, right? And what is an ORM? So in a nutshell, it's a framework that turns disgusting bloat code into neat fancy code. Like you can see on the left-hand side, if you have a certain query, a certain function that will build your database and create your tables for you, you're going to be using a lot of string injections there, especially when you're adding values to create fields and stuff. And it's going to be a full-on query straight into the database using SQL. There's going to be, yeah, it's a bit yucky. And you can see I'm not even calling it. It's so bad. It becomes very error prone. There isn't a kind of a one way, like a concise way of defining exactly what you want. Throughout my experience with people on Codementor, I have seen this a few times, and I always recommend using some sort of ORM, especially Sequelize. It's kind of like the industry standard. It does really, really cool stuff, and that's what we're going to see. And you can see that what Sequelize does for us on this side is pretty much just give us more concise definitions about exactly what's going to come into our tables in much fewer lines of code, because Sequelize pretty much abstracts everything for us, and we don't have to focus on the nitty-gritty. We can just focus on making our apps. Then on to Node.js, just a brief introduction. It's a JavaScript runtime making use of Chrome's V8 engine to allow writing of JavaScript for backend purposes. What's a V8 engine? I have no idea, but I'm assuming it's pretty cool. So I actually did look it up, and it's Google's open source like assembly and compiler language for JavaScript, so that the browser can read JavaScript. And basically, what Node.js did was take this V8 engine and give it kind of a voice in backend technologies as well. So if you'd have JavaScript for the front end, if you're building a web application and you're using React or using Angular or something like that, you will not have access to the file system. You cannot go straight into a database and use like a database driver to fetch data. You have to go through an API that hits a server that does that for you, because JavaScript can't get out of the browser. With a V8 engine, it's a C++ backed technology that allows JavaScript to be written for backend purposes, which allows Node.js's native libraries like FS, which is the file system, and your HTTP, which creates servers and all cool stuff. So that's Node.js in a nutshell, and that's the power that it gives us. Going on to JavaScript then. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, see it like a car. I don't really know cars that much, so I'm sure you guys have exponentially more experience in motor vehicles like that. And it must be just, if anyone's wondering why I'm wearing like a thick jacket, it's because you guys might be in the northern hemisphere and very, very warm in the summer, but we are in the winter and it's quite freezing cold. So I don't know, people always get amazed by that. It is weird being in the south, but it's pretty cool. You should come visit sometime. Anyway, why JavaScript? So JavaScript is because it's relatively simple to learn. It's heavy in demand. As you can see, it's number 3 out of the top 8 in-demand programming languages, according to a Turing survey in 2023. TypeScript is a close one behind that, but you'll see, in my opinion, is that JavaScript is nothing without TypeScript, and we'll see why. JavaScript, you can learn one language and you can instantly become a full stack developer. Like I did, I first learned Node.js and learned how to set up servers in the back end. And then I went on to React. It uses the same ecosystem of Node.js, NPM, Node Package Manager, the ability to use third-party libraries and all stuff like that. Back-end JavaScript, front-end JavaScript, the understanding between the two. And you can learn JavaScript and have effective knowledge of both of those stacks. And also, people might laugh at you, but you could make more money because it is highly in demand. And that's just a running joke at our business, where all the people who use real coding languages like C# and Java and all those object-oriented things are like, oh, it's a little JavaScript developer. But you know what? People like it. So what's the problem? However, I used to like JavaScript until I was playing around late 2020 with TypeScript, because I was just exploring it. And after a while, I realized that not only do we have to use TypeScript, but also our entire backend that we're using for production will be effectively unscalable and inoperable if we carried on just using JavaScript. And that's why TypeScript kind of came into being. It was a need, and people saw that the larger an application became, the more unreadable the JavaScript becomes, because JavaScript was really not meant to take off in such a way. It kind of was like a scripting language for browsers, but now it's become so much more. With Node.js, it's become a back-end language. It's become a language you can write lambdas in. There's actions and all kinds of MapReduce functions. If you've ever used a database, something called RavenDB, you can write crazy like mapping functions on your database in JavaScript. There's just so many applications of JavaScript now, and I don't think it was kind of thought that in the roadmap of JavaScript that it was going to become something like this. And when you have a massive application and you don't know that in this object there's a string and a boolean and not a string and a number, things can get very, very complicated. So TypeScript gives it back its dignity. And Vincent, about Java more popular than JavaScript, right? Exactly. Are Java and JavaScript the same thing? Maybe. Yeah, maybe recruiters think that. So I guess if you know JavaScript, you know both Java and script. So you know two programming languages. So maybe that's another plus for JavaScript. So this is from our old backend. It's a function that gets MySQL, which I guess the function name at least is telling us what it is. But it's also expecting 4 arguments. The first one is config, then tables, then return null, which I know is a Boolean, and flush, which I know is a Boolean because of its default values. And now the first thing it's telling me, if it's not return new, then I want to do something here. And here I'm saying DB is an empty object, so at least I know that this variable DB is an object. But here we go. I've got user, password, host, and port, which I'm destructuring from this config. I don't know what config is. I never knew what config is. Nothing is telling me what config is. But now immediately, if I ever use this function, I would have to know that there's a user, password, host, and a port in config. And nothing is telling me that, which is a problem. Already here, I can also see that there's config.db inside here, which is also bad practice because we just, so the reason we didn't destructure it is because we already have a db variable. But for some reason, I also need to know that db is also inside config. Already, it's starting to feel like I'm in the dark. And going back into this repository, I had to go through like 5 files. It's called going down the rabbit hole. I had to go through 5 files before I finally understood what each of these actually is. And even then, it was very difficult to see exactly what it was. You can see whenever I hover over any one of these, he has a model, which we have, which is so now I know that tables is an array, but the only way I would know is because I can see that we're using a for each function, which I know is an array method. And then inside table, we've got this called model, but model is any. So even if this is an array, I have no idea what's inside it. And then I didn't even know that it was a function that accepted Sequelize and Sequelize, which already doesn't really give me much. Basically, I'm coding in the dark here. With the TypeScript equivalent, when I create something, let's just say I'm creating a record in the database. I have two variables, an input, which immediately tells me what it is. I might not know necessarily what's in here, but thanks to Visual Studio Code's IntelliSense and most IDEs IntelliSense that are very compatible with TypeScript, if I use something that isn't in here, it's going to throw me an error, and we'll see that later on. It gives me a user ID, which I can see it's a string, and it returns me a promise of this type. And here I've got a validate schema, which is a function. And okay, from here you might not be able to see that I actually know what this is. But here I've done a little bit of an IntelliSense hover. If I just hover over this add audit, it immediately tells me exactly what goes in at every argument and exactly what type they are. And basically what TypeScript does is just shines a very big light on your code base. It gives you direction every step of the way, exactly what you need to do. And the most powerful thing is that it turns JavaScript into somewhat of a quasi-compiled language, which it means essentially that it's not even going to run until all the TypeScript errors are fixed. And that's exactly what we want. If we have a repository that has absolutely no typing errors, the chances of errors in our production applications are going to be extremely minimal. So that's the joy and the goal of TypeScript, to give you more compiler errors so you know what to fix, and fewer white screens if you ever code in React and your screen just turns white. It's just wonderful. So you can see here, there was a handle error statement over here, and it accepts a Boolean, right? So if I were to put anything else in it, it would be a compiler error telling me that you can't assign a number to type Boolean. And that's just one piece of the effectiveness of TypeScript. Cool. So that's just an introduction of the technologies we're going to use. And now we are going to code. Not going to get to the profit just yet, but hopefully we will soon. And now let me see if I can share my screen again. Any questions so far? Anyone wants to chime in while I'm changing screens? Let me see. That's strange, it's not doing it. So just a precursor to what we're going to do. I have a Docker instance running that connects to a local MySQL database. There's multiple ways to do it. I'm not going to get too much into that, but just know I do have a MySQL database that is running in the background. And that is going to help us. So I think if I had the access to share my screen, which for some reason I'm not able to do, let me see if I can share maybe another screen with you all. Yeah, no, it's strange. I'm trying to share a screen, but it's not letting me. It's not being a very friendly thing right now. So I'm just going to share my window. And basically what I'm doing while I'm talking to you is I'm just going to create I'm on a Mac, so I'm just going to create a completely empty folder, which we're going to start coding in. And so I'm basically in I guess I'll show you what I'm doing. Inside the terminal. Okay, now that's not letting me do it either. Okay, that's strange. Okay, so sorry about the technical issues. Okay, so I'm going to just run into this, and then we're going to open up VS Code, and then we can start coding. So let's jump into it. I am going to now share the VS Code screen. Hopefully that is also not working now. Very strange. Hold on. Okay, I'm not entirely sure what to do now. Let me see if I can drag this over to here. And undo that, and then let's see if it gives me the ability to share that window now. Let's see if I can share anything. Okay, cool. It has an infinite loop. Anyone's excited about that. So that worked. Let's try to share my other screen again now. It's very strange. Okay, let me see what happens if I just refresh the page. That might kick me out. Let's see if I open up another page. If anyone, for any reason, has had experience with this before and can get this to work, we much appreciate it. Hopefully, we can get it to work. Um, and yes, thank you. They did not use TypeScript. So there's probably a compiler error. What's a runtime error somewhere? Okay, I'm going to reload the site. Let's share. Okay, right. Let's do what we can. We're going to open up a VS Code browser instance. And we'll go along with that. So here we go. And then we'll share that. We might not have access to everything, but hopefully we can have access to some. So I'm going to share this screen, which seems to be the only screen that works. Cool. There's an infinite loop again. And here's my VS Code. Cool. So let's jump into this. So let's open a folder. And let's get to the one that I just created, which is called Fantasy Teams, which is not, yeah, I'm just checking. Okay, let's open this one because the other one just doesn't seem to exist. Let's see, Victor Fantasy Teams in Documents, which I think exists. Yeah, so I'm going to just check. Nope, nothing. So let's jump into that. Yeah, let's do these files. I do trust the authors. Great. Okay, cool. Unfortunately, we cannot actually see the blank folder that I had, which is slightly frustrating. Can everyone see my screen at least? Let me see if we can work one more time. If I jump into VS Code here and then turn it, let's try this. And then let's try. So here we're going to okay, so that's a cron tab. We don't want to share a cron tab. We want to share okay, frustrating. Okay, we're gonna have to do it in here. So let us jump into this. So let's go into here, and then we're going to jump into here. Okay, cool. So this is essentially how the repository is built up. Sorry, under better circumstances, we would be able to start it from scratch together. Unfortunately, I can't seem to share my screen, so I'm just trying to think of maybe a solution that would work. Maybe sharing this screen, which then shares another screen, which could actually possibly work. But we are running out of time, so let's just jump into this. So you can see here, basically what I have is, let's jump into this. Let's take this into here. Okay, so let's kill all of this then. That's strange. Okay, let's try at least just get rid of this folder. Okay, and then let's delete these ones. Great. Okay, so we've got, essentially this is how we're going to start, right? So the best way to start is to, I'm going into this Codementor. Once again, apologies for this. I'm not sure what went wrong. The first thing we do is we run a command called tsc init. Actually, we do an npm init, which okay, did that work? Oh wow. Let's, okay, so now this worked. Okay. I'll show you how you can open a terminal on VS Code. Let me just see if that thing will work one more time. Share terminal, entire screen, share screen one. Share something, please. Let me see what happens if I start to just close everything. And then hopefully then it will understand that I am going to share even fewer things. Sorry about this, hold on.
Hey, Sean, I think Control tilde should open a terminal window in VS Code, even on the web.
Thank you. Well, I am trying it. It doesn't seem to be doing anything, unfortunately. Let's just go, let's see if we can open a terminal here. So we're going to say view terminal. It was Control N. That's funny because I did write that. Anyway. Yeah, I can see. It says terminals are available in the web editor. Okay, but thank you for that. I'm going to try one more thing, and then hopefully we can see, because it looks like all my code is. I'm actually going to force quit absolutely everything except for this, and Docker, and then we'll see. So we're going to just take all of this away. And force quit it all, and then hopefully things will start working again. Okay, so now nothing. Okay, so what we'll do is, I guess in lieu of a live code, I will just run through and explain pretty much the brief concept of what we hope to achieve here. So if I'm going to share the screen again. There we go. And what we have here is pretty much our repository. It has a package.json, which we kind of built up with npm init, and then we just give a default of y, which just gives us all the default questions that we have. You can see that the dependencies I've got here are Typescript. That is the important one, basically, to have. And something called tsconfig pause, and you'll see why we need that now. Then I've got 3 scripts. One is test, which is the one that will kind of run our test library. Hopefully it will work. We have, and then we have this, which is called dev tsc. And basically what this does is it's tsc watch, and this is just a terminal that watches for compiler errors for TypeScript. And essentially, whenever you have an error here, you just quickly fix it up, and then it's gone. And that's pretty much what we want. Then this bootstrap will come into later, but essentially we have this, and TypeScript works with using a config file like this, tsconfig.json. You actually just run something called tsc in it to get that to work, which is what. Okay, so that's tsc in it. That's what you would run in your terminal. Unfortunately, I can't share a terminal. Not sure what's going on. And it actually gives you this tsconfig, which actually gives you a bunch of options here. The important options is this target here. And I wanted it to be ES5 because I wanted to target kind of the most basic, most lowest kind of version of JavaScript, not using const and lets. It's still using vars. You don't have arrow functions. Basically compiles it down to a JavaScript that can be read and understood by any browser or any runtime. Because at the end of the day, TypeScript isn't a new language. It is a syntactic sugar on JavaScript, which compiles down to JavaScript. It just gives you a wonderful developer experience to scale and all cool things like that. You have this module, which is common JS, module resolution is Node. Those are kind of standard. The secret sauce is using this base URL and paths. And basically what this does is allows you to use absolute imports instead of relative imports in all your folders, and you'll see the power of that. Then you've got a bunch of things here where you have declarations and declaration maps, and that means in your distributed folder, it gives you all the cool typing declarations and stuff so that if you ever want to kind of publish this to NPM, it will maintain all cool typings and declarations, so anyone else will be able to understand your types. And then this root directory, pretty much it's telling me, TypeScript, please read all TS files from the source, and then build a dist folder here, so that will only run on TSC when you watch, or when you run TSC or TSC watch, and it will build a dist file for you on the same level as the source, which will pretty much have all your code, but in ES5 and JavaScript instead of TypeScript. Then you have other cool stuff like no unused locals and no unused parameters, which actually throws you an error and won't compile if you have a variable that you haven't used, contributing to even cleaner code and all cool stuff like that. So here is the folder structure that we have. We have a common folder, we have modules, and then we have kind of like these scripts. I actually don't know what's inside here. Okay, fine. So this was just a basic example. This is ES6. It's an arrow function. We have string injections here with this dollar and curly brace signs, and this will just print a string of hello to. And if we had the access to actually show you what would happen if we compiled this, it would actually compile down to var ES6 equals function, return hello, function like that, and then we will say return hello plus 2 or something like that. And that is what kind of the function of TypeScript is, to take the high level JavaScript, which browsers might not understand, and compile it down into JavaScript, which everyone will understand, even though we understand this a bit better, hopefully. So that is just a basic, that was just a test that we would have done. Inside the common, this is kind of where the secret sauce comes in. So basically what I was going to build with everyone was a sweet little database of like fantasy football or whatever people are interested in these days. I myself am not such a football fan, but you can be like a fantasy league, and you have players and teams, and you have like associations between players and teams. And the understanding is that you can have a player who can belong to multiple teams, and then you can have a team which obviously will include many players. And the interfaces are pretty much where TypeScript shines, because this is building out exactly what the schema of our objects are. So here I've got player creation attributes. When I add a player, I need to have a name, I need to have an age of number, I need to have a height of number, I need to have a skill, and then I can possibly add this array of objects. I can show you here, it's an array of these objects of team ID and value, which will just be under team IDs there, and we'll see how that plays out going forward. And then we have something else which is really cool. This is when you create a player, and then when you actually have a player, we have all of the fields here, and that's what we're doing with this extends keyword. We're extending everything in here, and we're adding just an ID and possibly an array of teams, which actually comes from team attributes, which comes from here. And the team attributes are pretty much the same thing in terms of the team. So interfaces are really, really big in TypeScript, and it just gives you complete insight as to what is happening at any given time, what your payload looks like, what objects you're supposed to be passing through. And the best part is that it throws you compiler errors if you're using them in the wrong way. You have also enums in TypeScript, which is really, really cool. And even though these interfaces and types don't actually change anything in your code functionally, they're only there for formatting and syntax enhancement issues. Enums, a specific TypeScript thing, can actually be used. It is actually considered an object. It does actually contain values, and we'll see exactly how that works. An enum, if anyone knows, is just like a list of values that are kind of constant, and you can use them. As you see here, when I create a team, it has a region which can only be one of these 4 values. So this is all the TypeScript interface stuff, and I always like to have a folder specifically that deals with interfaces. And I always like to have an index.ts file, which is kind of the landing page for all of them. In TypeScript, in normal JavaScript, you would have to use const equals require, but in TypeScript, you have the ability to just use our ES6 import export, which I think is just much cleaner and much nicer to look at, much easier to work with. We can export an object here, and then inside here, we can just export absolutely everything from player. We do that for all of that. And then inside our interfaces, we once again do that, export everything from interfaces. And what that gives us the ability to do is, if you look inside a module, create player, you can see that all I have to do is import everything I need from the common folder. So it removes something like this, import player creation attributes from something like that, interfaces player or something like that, and then you'll have like 3 or 4 lines giving you all the different things that you want to import. You don't have to do that anymore. This tsconfig paths from the TypeScript initiation over here, which gives you your base URL, and pretty much this telling me my base URL is source, and the paths, I want to give an absolute path of anything that's inside my source file using this path kind of key code. And that gives me the ability to just import absolutely everything from my common folder. And if we were on VS Code on desktop, you'd be able to see that we get complete IntelliSense from this. That's where this package comes into effect, this tsconfig paths, because the way to actually run it, TypeScript out of the box doesn't understand absolute imports, but you just have to register this tsconfig paths library, and then it will understand all of your absolute imports. But in terms of just clean code and scalability, so you're not going to have like 15 import statements at the top of every code block. It is an absolute game changer. And yeah, so that's what's happening in our interfaces. Now we're going to look at our Sequelize stuff, and basically it cascades like this. You create an interface, you use those interface to build models in Sequelize, and these models are of type of these. And you can see that inside a third-party package, there are also types. And the great thing about it is that you can use their types to create your own types. These little chevrons over here are actually generics in TypeScript. And what generics are, if you think about it theoretically like a function, it's like a type where you can pass in other types into it to give you a more defined type of what you want. This model defined is telling me I want a SQL model of something, and I can pass through what exactly I want to model it by. So now this is telling me that I have a model in my database which has these attributes inside it. And what do I do with that? I use that to create a player model. I define this as a function which accepts an object of Sequelize, type Sequelize, and then I create a schema, right, which gives me a model. So it's going to be, this is of type models, model names.player, which is over there. And I define it, and then I use, so then this is my specific type, but I'm using the Sequelize library to define exactly what I want. This is going to be a player, so it's going to be this player. That's what the name of the model is. That's exactly what I'm calling here. And then inside here, just in the documentation of Sequelize, this is where you define exactly what it is. And the joy of this is because I've defined it as this model, if I were to start typing name inside my normal VS Code, like on my desktop, it would actually give me IntelliSense hints about what is actually allowed to be passed through here. And that's like a massive help as well. So it just enhances the developer experience. It makes everyone's lives a lot easier. We're doing the same thing essentially with teams. As you can see here, I have 3 models. I have player, team, and then I've got this bridge table between player and team. So here's the team. It's just the name and the region. And here's player team, which is my model here, which I'm defining here. It gives me, I've got a player ID, which is a primary key, because this is a function. There's a last little helper function that I've defined here, Sequelize integer required, which, and you can pass through, is it a primary key or not? Once again, this is using generics, and it understands that this is of type model player attributes because I'm passing through the generic functions. Unfortunately, if I was able to code and share my screen, I would show you in much more depth, but we'll do what we can. So, and you can see here, I've given primary key to be true. So these are both primary keys. And then it understands that this is somewhat of a bridge table between player and team. And then we've got this little value. So maybe he was hired on this team for $100 billion, or he was hired on that team for $7 gajillion, or however much soccer players get paid, or badminton players. It could be a badminton team, you know. So that's what we do with player team, and the same thing with team. This is us just defining our models inside our Sequelize. I will share a link to exactly this repository afterwards as well, if anyone is interested. So you'll actually have exactly the code of everything like here. It is public, and you can enjoy it. So inside, so this is where all the juice comes together. Basically, we're passing through a Sequelize into this function, and what we want back is this models. What do we want back? We want this object that we defined inside our configuration, which gives us all the models inside our database. And we want this function to return that object. That's what this syntax in Sequelize is. It's, what is this function going to return for me? And then if I don't return exactly this, it's going to throw me a compiler error telling me I'm doing something wrong. And that's the joy, because I want to be told that I'm doing something wrong. And you can see here, I'm going to fetch this player model. I'm fetching the team model. I'm fetching the player team model, passing through the same Sequelize. And now this Sequelize instance is completely built up with all of these. It's pretty much being injected with everything that I want inside my database. And this is kind of the strength of Sequelize, is that very, very simply, I can give associations from one to the other. And I can, as a player, belong to many teams, as the association will be a key of with the name teams, which will give me an array of teams. And I do it through this model here, player team. And the same thing with the team. And it goes through player team. And then Sequelize pretty much builds, when I run like the initial synchronization of what my models are to what my database is, it builds all my tables for me. It builds my database. It builds all the foreign keys and the primary keys that it needs without me having to write more than one line of actual SQL code. And yeah, so that's everything in terms of our Sequelize models. Then we got this connection. Like, remember when we had that JavaScript example, this is pretty much telling me exactly what I'm going to get. I'm going to return inside this DB config that returns an options, and I'm returning the options of my database. I've got a little database here, which gives an environment variable, and if not, it has this fantasy team ball, which gets which is a default value. Inside the MySQL connection, you can have it with a new connection. And if you want to have it with the database, because when we initially bootstrap it, we are going to want to bootstrap without a database to create the database. And this pretty much just gives us our connection. And inside our models, we get the models with association based on this connection, which is of type Sequelize, which we defined over here. And this gives us our Sequelize object, which we can then use everywhere else. gives us an object of all our models and as well as a raw database connection if we wanted it. So how do we use that? Let's go into our modules now. So this is everything inside common because it's going to be used throughout our application. And inside our modules is pretty much where all the backend, all the methods are that actually connect to our database. So a very simple one is to create a player. And you can see there, I've defined the input as these creation attributes. And I use a joy validation library here. You can see even joy can be used with TypeScript generics to create. I can say that this object will be of type player creation attributes, and it expects therefore all of these fields. It's required string, required number, required height, required skill, and I'm going to validate that based on this player create schema, and then this will give me my validated input. Then I just call this function to fetch my models. I then create a transaction because what if I want to create teams as well? And you can see how the code is just very easy to read. It tells me await this player.create. I'm going to create it with the input that I have. I'm passing through the transaction, which is coming through here, because if something goes wrong, I want to call revert everything here. And that's pretty much what is built into this transaction. If you just read the Sequelize docs, you're going to, so then I said, yeah, if we have an array of team IDs, I mean, if the length of it is greater than 0, then I'm going to want to set up these player team creation attributes. And then I'm going to say, once again, just the player team models and bulk create them. And that's just a very, very simple, like 6 or 7 lines of code in order to create a player and associated teams. It returns the player, which will then return me this player model. So I'm not going to get any compiler errors here. This function is returning exactly what it says it should be returning. And it just gives you a very nice landmark of what I should be returning in here. And then we have pretty much the normal CRUD operations here. We're going to fetch the player, and then we're going to destroy it, which is another SQL function, a function in Sequelize that just runs the delete option. And get player, it's the same kind of idea. We're taking the models from the connection. We're always going to be using this connection, which is great. It's not even asynchronous, the connection itself, but here this will be asynchronous. That's why we have to wrap every function inside an async. We've got the players here, same thing pretty much. I made a utility function that searches the rows because you can bring in things you want to search by. You can also bring in a pagination object. We set up a type for that pagination object. But you can see the power of TypeScript where everything is defined and well understood. And if you don't actually know what this is, you can always just go into where the source is and see exactly what should be passed through here. And if you don't pass through the right thing, it's going to scream at you until you do pass through the right thing. But hopefully that will happen before production. So that is pretty much in a nutshell what is inside the modules. And you can see how the modules relate to the common folder. Like over here, it's fetching everything from common. And that's a very nice kind of clean code, reusable. Everything inside here is reusable. I don't define anything more than once. And I always kept using the word scalable. So what would my definition of scalable be? My definition of scalable would be, well, if I needed to extend my database and add a completely new object, a new schema, and a new association, I would just have to duplicate one of these and just reconfigure it with the new interfaces. I would have to duplicate one of these models, and then I would just have to add it into here with getting another model in the association. And pretty much to add more things takes very few lines of code and follows the same structure as what we've done before. And I think that is a somewhat good definition of the understanding of scalable. So if you were to look at a test, which you can see here, I just had like a very small test here. First, I would bootstrap it, which would create all my databases and all my things. And then I would just test the teams. When I ran this locally, it actually did come out that these were true. I'm creating a team 1, I'm creating a team 2. I'm testing to see that team 1 and team 2 exist. And they did exist. And if I hopefully can share my screen and show you my, let me see. If I can show you my MySQL database, it doesn't give me the option here. Okay, here we go. MySQL. Oh, where did it go? Okay, let me bring it onto this side now. All right, here's hoping. So we've got MySQL Workbench. Yeah, no, it's not giving me any options whatsoever, unfortunately. But if you were to see it in the database, those fields would actually exist. Those records would actually exist in the database. Sequelize has done all the work for you, and you're pretty much good to go. So yeah, once again, I apologize for that weird technical hitch. I cannot get my screen to share itself, which except for my main screen, but even then I cannot get my actual screen to share. I can only get a window to share, and therefore I cannot share my Visual Studio Code. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to show you everything I wanted to show you. However, I will share the code of this repository so you can kind of dissect it yourself and see where how you can integrate some of the principles into your own application, and just to see the power of TypeScript as you go through with it. Cool. So let me share the screen again. At least this one works. And let's go back into our slides. And we have, well, that's it. We've got profit, which is, I hope we all profited out of this, and a QA session. So we've got about like 9 minutes left. If anyone has any questions, either you can put them on the chat and I can answer them. Okay, cool. So I've got a few questions here. Yeah, so Control-Shift-P, right. I tried to open a terminal, but we saw that it did not work. Sorry, let me stop sharing. So you don't have that infinite loop. Awesome. So what is the function of question mark when put at the end of a variable? Oh, so that's something called optional chaining, which essentially means if it exists, I want to then go deeper into it, and if it doesn't exist, then then it will just return me an undefined or a null. Right. Cool. All right. How do you run migrations with a setup? So that is, thanks, Matt, for the compliment. I appreciate it. Migrations, are you saying in terms of like fetching data from an existing MySQL database and then pushing it into another one? Something like an ETL of sorts, right? Yeah. So, okay, fine. So actually, I haven't actually gone so much into the Sequelize CLI itself. So I cannot comment too much on that. We haven't necessarily need to use migrations in our environment. But I mean, I'm pretty sure there is obviously facilitation for that. And I would very much like to explore it and see exactly how it works. So yeah, thank you for that. Definitely would look at the documentation there. Where's the documentation? Okay, fine, yeah. Yeah, so you got the migrations documentation. And that's definitely something I would look into. Any other questions? Right. So using the db connection.sync force true, that will drop all records in the database. Right, exactly. It has another function, another method called if you sync with alter true. So that does its best to try and set up pretty much all the configuration that you've had in your database and how you've set everything up without necessarily removing anything in your database. Sequelize itself says you probably shouldn't use either of these two methods in production. So I warn you, please don't do that. Yeah, rather do migrations, ETLs, things like that. I guess you can look at the Sequelize CLI there. That would just be out of the scope of this seminar. Cool. Anything else? Okay, awesome. So yeah, once again, thank you so much for attending. I'm honored that you guys would come and listen to me. I hope that you oh, what test library am I using? Like I said, so I didn't go into a test library like Jest or anything like that, but it's fully compatible with it, especially with your what's it called, like your teardowns and your setups at the beginning. You just run that bootstrap, so it kind of like sets everything before then, and like kind of sets everything to default, and then you can start testing it. It's just asynchronous. You can easily integrate Jest into this. I mean, I would use that. And yeah, but like I said, just for the purposes of this, I'll just use like a basic async function that I just set up there. I wish I could have shown you though. It would have actually worked. Yeah. Cool. Anything else? We have about 3 minutes. Okay, cool. Yeah, so you can always get me on Codementor. I'll show you the link. Hold on. Thank you. And you can always just start a conversation with me. I've got a few articles there if you just want to read up on them. It discusses things like TypeScript generics. It discusses REST APIs versus GraphQL. I've got an article there that will just take you through basic implementation of those. It also has I've got a few nice articles on React and TypeScript if you want to look at front-end technologies leveraging the power of TypeScript. Also pretty learner monorepos there in terms of setting up one single TypeScript repository for all your interfaces so that you can use them both on the back end and on the front end without you having to copy and paste the interfaces from back end to front end. And that kind of gives you kind of like a chance to put all your code, all your typings into like an NPM package, which you could then deploy and then use in any of your repositories, especially if you have like a very advanced complex application with multiple endpoints and you want to maintain the typing consistently throughout them. Yeah, so awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm very humbled to have assisted you in anything and hopefully given you just clarity on that TypeScript isn't difficult to understand and it is so essential to JavaScript development. I'd like to see way more repositories using it. And hopefully I gave you just an example, a demonstration of how much easier it makes development. Once again, I said that I will expose I actually will paste it in here, the GitHub link to that repository. Just quickly before we close off, just opening my GitHub desktop, getting the link, and here we go. Let's just jump. What's it? Control-Shift-G. Cool. And see, it's actually not the final version, but I will actually push up that final version. But let me copy this onto here so everyone can look at it, and I will get that final version up very soon, hopefully. Thank you so much for attending, and have a great afternoon or evening. We're in the evening, so have a great day, and yeah, reach out if you need anything. Thank you. Goodbye.